In front of a packed courtroom, Wisconsin Supreme Court justices heard arguments in a case that could greatly impact you and the presidential election outcome next year. NBC 15's Elizabeth Wattis listened in on the 3-hour hearing today about redistricting in one of the most contentious battleground states in the country, the Badger State.
Yeah, Mark, a case that's drawing national attention is now in the hands of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Today, state justices heard arguments on whether or not to scrap the current legislative voting map. The debate is one that divides Republicans and Democrats. Liberals saying the Legislative Assembly map is unfair and favors Republicans. The argument is narrower, though, than that. The side that wants the map changed argues the current one is unconstitutional because not all districts are contiguous, and many are what is called voting islands. Those are areas not connected to the rest of the district. Attorneys who want the maps changed say it's important to keep districts connected to better represent the people who live there.
You are connecting like communities with each other, neighborhoods with neighborhoods that surround them. And that goes to important representational interests. And so this limits the legislature's power to engage in distortions of representational government.
Okay, so the other side is arguing to leave the maps as they are, and they say the contingency argument has no merit, and the decision to file the lawsuit one day after the court flipped to liberal is purely a political stunt.
Nor is there anything to cry foul about, for their delay in the governor's about face reveals something about the nature of their claims. They are meritless. They are a wolf in sheep's clothing designed to backdoor a political statewide remedy.
Okay, so now that the arguments have concluded, the case is in the hands of the justices. We're expecting a decision sometime in December or January. Live in the studio, Elizabeth Wattis, NBC 15 News.
Elizabeth, thank you. And while justices were in the courtroom, people rallied outside in the Capitol Rotunda in support of scrapping the current map and having a nonpartisan group draw a new one. The Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition, ACLU Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign gathered supporters to watch a live stream of the court proceedings while chanting for what they call fair maps. Supporters of the change say right now the islands on the map make it unfair, gerrymandered, and one-sided. They say it's not a proper representation of voters in the Badger State.
My biggest thing at the end of the day is that everyone deserves a seat at the table, and for the longest time, I mean, the legislature has decided to surgically carve and divide communities, and you see so many people feel like their voices have been silenced because of the way that our maps are.
Madison isn't the only city the group held rallies in today. They also stopped by Milwaukee, Green Bay, and Eau Claire.